looking to figure out what materials you should sell this week or hold this week, now is the time to do it. Our weekly report is going to give you that information, up-to-date market news, pricing. Let's get right into it. We'll talk about it inside. Hey scrappers, Tom here. Today is Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. We are live right now. So if you're watching this, it's 11 o'clock Eastern on the 24th. Ask us some questions. We'll be responding to some questions that were asked last week. And we'll do our best to get to any of your questions today too. So, these markets, I've been talking to a lot of people in the last couple of weeks, and really the last week I've been talking to people more about where they think things are going. So what does that mean? When I look at the markets, I'm looking at 6 to 12 months from now. So in the next 6 months, what do we have? We have a presidential election that could change administrations, that could change different rules when it comes to, what the focuses are, what the priorities are. And that could also have a huge impact on commodities. So when I look at these commodity prices and I look at them and I see such a crazy unstable market, I try to remind myself, all right, we are in the middle of the summer, and that middle of the summer period from the 4th of July to the end of August is a very heavy time for traders and manufacturers to have vacations, to have machines shut down. So it never surprises me when I see prices changing and really dropping in July and August. That has been a traditional thing for as long as I can remember. So it doesn't shock me. But what I do look at is some of these copper prices. And when I look at some of the movements, we've seen copper prices dropping down 15 cents or so. And you're going to start to see these national averages really moving downward. And I'm going to share one of the screens with you just so you can see, some of what's going on right now and some of the reported prices that are out there. But I put a poll up on LinkedIn recently asking, about copper hitting $4 or $5 next. And that was right when copper was right around $4.50. About 2/3 of the people responded that it was going to be closer to 4, and then, the other going to 5 next. Well, unfortunately, as you can see here, we've had a very big decline in prices. And when you look at some of these reported bare bright prices, $3.30, $3.34, $3, $3.45, $3.71. That's where we are. My scrapyard's paying $3.65 today, and we aggressively dropped yesterday by 10 cents because we saw the market going down again. And when I look at some of these copper prices, I don't think about what happened the end of May where those markets ran up so quickly. That was such a 3 or 4 week window that really didn't do much for us other than give us a really quick high and then a really quick low, if you think about it. Because we've now had markets drop over 20% since then. And those prices are not really moving in a way that we want them to move. So the demand for them is out there. And some of the things that we're reading about obviously goes to China, right? And the Chinese, they tried to cut their interest rates. And I'm just going to read this right now. This was an article that I read from investing.com. China's recent interest rate cuts failed to boost iron ore and copper markets. Despite the People's Bank of China lowering both short and long-term rates, key commodity prices like iron ore and copper saw minimal changes. And the Chinese have tried to do this in the past by really, I'm going to use the phrase, manipulating their currency or moving how they have their currency based. And they've had real success in it. They've been able to cut interest rates, increase copper prices. But another article that I read talked about how much material the Chinese had. And going into May, they didn't have as much copper on hand as they wanted to. But when those prices went up so high, even though they wanted to buy more material, the market went up so quickly, they were forced to flood the market with hundreds of thousands of pounds of copper, millions of pounds of copper, because they were able to make so much money. And we're going to pull up a screen real quick, and it's just going to show you, if you could go to the 3-month view, you want to do 6? It's going to show you a really good idea of what I'm talking about in the last kind of 6 months or so when it pertains to copper. Look where we are. we are exactly where we were the end of April. So 3 months later, and look, we're kind of where we started. And if you go even further in the middle of February, you can see markets trading in that 368, 375 range. And that may be where we're headed in the near future for the balance of the summer. So this week, in a very rare move, I recommend holding Bear Bright. I would hold Bear Bright right now. It is not something that I would sell. If you're taking your time to strip your material and really clean it, Bear Bright is dense, Bear Bright is heavy. You can get a couple 100 pounds in a garbage can. So why not start to save something that you will be able to make more money on? Now, when it comes to some of your other red metals, number one tubing, your yellow brasses, I know red metals and I say yellow brass, but those are things that I would continue to move, right? Unless you really just want to sit and hold on to them and wait for the markets to improve. But I really would hold on to Bear Bright, and then I would hold on to stainless right now. And I'll talk about the stainless markets because they've been super frustrating, because I really feel like stainless steel prices are so incredibly depressed. But when I read about some of these articles, it doesn't look like it's going to really get increased anytime soon. Read an article that we'll share from Miners News, and it talked about one of the largest stainless companies in the world, BHP, who also is heavy into copper manufacturing. And this is what it says. BHP will temporarily suspend its Western Australian nickel operations from October of 2024 through February of 2027, citing an oversupply of global nickel prices. And you can see the prices right here. My price today for stainless is 31 cents, national average at 32 cents. But if you look at some of these prices that have been reported, 25, 40, 33, 35, 24, 30, 25 cents, we're not seeing the markets move. So if you have the ability to hold on to stainless steel, that is really a strong item that I would recommend holding on to. And in all of the years that I've been doing these reports, I've never, just so everyone's aware, I've never specifically said until today holding on to Bear Bright copper, right? So I'm talking to you from a scrapper point of view. As scrap yards, I have the same mentality always. I turn and burn all of my material every 2 to 3 days. So it's hard for me to sit here and say, oh, I'm saying one thing and doing another. No, I'm trying to help you make more money and giving you a little insight to where the market is from a scrapyard owner point of view. So, I'm trying to give you advice on where the markets will go so you can make more money. That's why we make these weekly videos, our YouTube videos, and the like. But stainless prices do not look like they're going to be going anywhere. When I think about the next wave, and we can get that screen away for a second. When I think of the next wave of where markets are going, EVs, batteries, India, right? Those are going to be the three things that I'm really looking out for in the coming months and the coming years. How will the electric vehicle market affect the battery market, where, by the way, we have seen about a 2-cent increase in lead acid battery prices, but I'm talking about the rechargeable lithium ion nickel based batteries. How will the EV market marry up with that battery market and then integrate nickel, because nickel really is a metal that can be integrated really well? And then how are those going to affect the markets? And then how is the growth of India going to affect the markets? We know that China really, grew themselves in the 1980s and 1990s and the 2000s, that 30-year time period, their infrastructure, their globalization, bringing a lot of their citizens out of poverty and into newer places, and having all these utilities that many of us in the US take advantage and take for granted, where they did that for a period. And I know my wife was in India 8 years ago. It's been a long time, but I have friends that have been there since. And when I see some of the pictures that she sends me, or that that she took, and then some that my friends either post online or send me, you can see that the Indian population really has a tremendous growth period in front of them. They're the largest country in the world population-wise. They have a tremendous amount of resources. And if they can start to really develop themselves in a global push, we will see a massive demand for not only copper, but steel and all other types of products kind of moving forward. And while I talk about steel, let me talk about that for a second. Again, flatlining these prices, not seeing any type of market growth when it comes to steel prices. I had one vendor say that they were raising their heavy steel prices, their number ones, their rotors, by $10 a ton, not because the price went up, but because their flow of scrap is so depressed right now. And that has to do with a bunch of different things. Summertime, generally seeing lower prices. A lot of these furnaces are working. A lot of these smelters are not really pushing for massive amounts of steel. But on top of that, and I think I talked about this last week, we're seeing the new cold rolled steel pricing falling as well. And how does that affect scrap? Well, if they can't sell the newer products at $1,000 a ton and they have to drop it to $900 a ton to try to sell these new products, what's that going to do to the scrap market? Because the only way that a lot of these manufacturers of steel can increase or decrease their margins is through that scrap market. So when they're really busy and they're blowing through their steel scrap piles and they need more, that's when the prices uptick. So we're hoping that in September, if we start to see the interest rates being cut, that will give a really quick boost to the economy. I truly expect that in September, if we see the interest rates cut by 1/4 point or 1/2 point, we're going to see a quick jump to the market, and we'll be ready and we'll give you warning when that meeting's taking place. That may spur a bunch of prices going up really quickly or down really quickly, because if people are predicting 1/2 point cut and it goes to 25 basis points, that's not going to help things. So a lot of it really is based on demand and where things are. Now, I briefly talked about the presidential election, and an article that I read from investing.com talked about the Trump presidency and what impact it could have on some of the markets. So Citibank analysts believe a potential Trump presidency could significantly impact commodity markets. They foresee major tariffs on U.S. imports. What does that mean? Well, it was like what we did to China a few years ago. Trump did that, and then the Biden administration has continued those tariffs on the Chinese. What does that mean? You can't just send us your goods, free and clear. You can't send us iPhones and cars and clothes and it's just an even swap, because they're not buying as much product from the United States as the United States is buying from the Chinese. So if we do see a lot of the tariffs going into effect, what could they affect and how could they affect metal prices? That's going to be something that I really watch out for, because it could increase some of the domestic steel grades, because then material would be staying here. And instead of exporting it to then have it imported and have tariffs slapped on, the new steel from other places, then you're going to be able to keep it here in the country. That's a really positive thing. But if you're not going to have that happen, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to see, commodities going down? Are we going to have them kind of flatlining themselves for a little while? So it's going to be really interesting to see how and what that's going to happen and how it's going to affect things. I just don't see a strong case for steel prices going down. I think that we're kind of bottoming out where we are. And I do think that we're going to start to see an increased market demand the second half of this year and really the fourth quarter. I think that we're going to have to get into October, November, into the presidential election for us to really have a good idea of how to further predict, 2025, because we just don't know. Other points that we've seen, catalytic converters, I'll talk about briefly, because it seems like week over week, there's not a lot of market news. Now, the team over at rrcats.com is always buying catalytic converters, quoting PayPal payments, check payments free shipping on OEM cats. So we have a lot of great things there. But until we start to see a huge decarbonization push that starts to include these three precious metals that are in the catalytic converters, platinum, rhodium, and palladium, I don't expect to see a large uptick here. We're continuing to see weak US auto sales. We're continuing to see more people buying electric vehicles, even if it's at a slower pace. I believe 7 to 12% of the vehicles that are being sold right now are electric vehicles. So that's great for the copper markets, but bad for the catalytic converter recycling markets. What we need to see is a decarbonization where countries are starting to pull this stuff out of the air. And if they can use filters and metals of platinum, palladium, rhodium, that's going to really help us pull those catalytic converter prices up. I just don't see that happening right now, unfortunately. So I really see a flatline price moving forward. And one day we'll hopefully get some markets that are moving again. But 2024 has really been very flat when you look at catalytic converter prices, other than a couple of ripples here or there, but nothing to really write home about. One more piece of news that we read about on Reuters, and that talked about a energy project. Now, this was more a bipartisan couple of senators from each half of the aisle getting together, trying to speed up how we're going to create energy, how it's going to be mass produced, how it's going to be distributed. And this was something, I read it, and it says U.S. senators introduce a bill to speed the approvals of energy products. This bill addresses the current permitting system, and hopefully we'll try to be able to get things moving forward faster. Now, what do we know about politicians? They're really, really good at saying a lot of things and then not following up with a lot of things. So when that happens, it's kind of hard to be able to take their word for it, because I just don't see a really strong push to having those prices increasing anytime soon. Now, we got some questions last week that I'd like to address, and then we have some questions that have popped up today. One of the first questions we had last week was on a video that we made for on copper hair wire, and we've talked about this before. And here's what the video talked about: copper hair wire. The video talked about why it's graded as a #1 tubing. And then one of the questions or comments, I should say, says, I was told that any copper that vaporizes is caught in the pollution control equipment and added back to the copper. So paying less for things like magnet wire or even fine stranded copper welding wire is just a scam. So again, all opinions, right? My opinion is that material that goes up, and yes, it does get slightly caught in those different filters. That still means that you need to do more work. So it's not as easy as just think about it. You throw wood into a fire and it starts to burn. Well, that's great. Well, what happens if you have, you were chopping the wood and there's all these little fine pieces all over the ground? Well, that wood can still burn too, and you throw it into the fire, but it's going to take additional work to take those smaller pieces up. So when that fine stranded copper does dissipate and go up, right, and get caught, it takes another level of work. And while many people will say, oh, it's still a scam and they're getting us because a lot of people are always, the big people are coming after the small people, I can't disagree fully. But when I look at things from a business point of view, that copper is such a small percentage going up there. I do think that we should be getting bare bright, but unfortunately that's just how the markets and all of the mills are that I've ever dealt with. I've never been able to sell finely stranded hair wire as a bare bright, and if I have, they then caught it and downgraded the product. So just things to keep in mind moving forward. Another question we had is, all yellow brass the same? Are there different levels like copper, bare or copper pieces? Same question applies to red brass. So this is a question of how many grades of yellow brass are there? Now, yellow brass to me is normally 60% copper based. It could be as low as 55. It could be as high as 65 or 70%. Once you start to have a copper composition that's around 65 to 70%, that's when you start to go into the semi-red category. Not red brass, not yellow brass, somewhere in the middle. But if you don't have enough material to be able to warrant a higher price, you're not going to be able to sit here and ask for more money, especially if you don't know what the copper composition is. Or if you have a yellow brass that's contaminated, has a heavier amount of zinc or maybe some lead in it, that could downgrade it. So generally, yellow brass is just one category. And then red brass, for me, what I kind of go off of rule of thumb is a minimum of 80% copper. So 80% of the material of that red brass has to be copper based. I'd like to see it closer to 85%, but sometimes you could have red brass that has other higher graded materials in it, like tin. So instead of having it just be like a copper and zinc, they could have it be copper and tin or some other alloys in there. So it could increase the pricing, but generally rule of thumb, 1 grade for yellow brass, 1 grade for red brass. Hopefully that helps. We had another question. We did a video talking about roofing copper, and we talked about the different grades and things to look for and the different names and categories, whether it was light copper, number 3 copper, copper L copper. We had lots of different names, but we had a question that said, what happens if roofing copper is clean? It should be number 1 then. It's as thick as some copper pipe that goes as number 1. It's just not kind of rolled around to that circle. And that's completely right. If you have new roofing copper flashing that's cut off pieces, that's kind of, from new installs and has no contaminants on it, that is a number 1 copper, and that should be a number 1 tubing price. Here we have 2 categories. We have a number 1 tubing, we have a number 1 flashing, just so if people are confused and they have a lot of, flashing material, then we can have it graded that way. Do we have any other questions to be answered right now?
One question is Miles asked what copper looked like, but you covered.
Yeah, Miles, we talked about that. I mean, copper prices are down 20% since the end of May. For the first time ever, I'm recommending holding your bare bright copper wire so you can take that, and kind of run from there. Couple other people just making some different we had different reactions, pencil thick or thicker to be able to have bare bright. Some people thanking us for the videos, and it's always our pleasure to make them. We're going to try to do these live sessions as often as possible. Next week will be pre-recorded because I have a business conference I'll be at. But we're answering all of your social questions throughout the week. So continue to ask them, comment, and we'll continue to push them out there. So appreciate everyone tuning in. What does silver plated brass classify as? Great question. It just says rock. So we'll go with rock. Silver coated brass should be a higher price, right? So how much of it do you have? If you don't have a lot of it, it's probably going to go with your yellow brass because your scrapyard isn't going to separate it. We sort and separate our silver coated brass here. And just to give you an idea, it takes me about 4 to 5 months to save 500 or 600 pounds of silver coated brass. And you can sell it at a premium, but if I have less than 400 or 500 pounds, I cannot sell it at a premium. So if you do have silver coated, then you should sort and separate it and save it. But if your scrapyard doesn't have a category for that, you're welcome to contact us at iScrap and Rockaway Recycling, and hopefully we can buy it from you. Another question we have from Small Creek Firewood: what about aluminum cans? Where are they at? Aluminum can prices slightly down. I just realized I didn't talk about aluminum. A lot of stuff going on today. Aluminum can prices slightly down right now. I don't have the reported prices up, but they should be in the 45 to 50 cent range. We've seen aluminum prices dropping slightly by about 1.5% the last couple of weeks. Not enough for me to really be worried about, but aluminum can prices should be in that 45 to 55 cent per pound scrap range. JMZ says, as an electrician, do you see copper retail prices coming down with the scrap prices? Yes, but there's a domino effect, JMZ. Think about it. All the copper that's on the shelves right now was probably produced a minimum of 2 to 3 months ago. So think about timeline of copper, and you're always welcome to use iScrap to see different, historical numbers for the last 30 days. But when you look at copper prices right now, they're lower, but they're being bought lower today. So those lower prices will go into production as new stock in the next 30 to 90 days, depending on where it's going. Those products won't hit shelves for 90 to 180 days. So there's generally always a 3 to 4 month lag with scrap prices and copper trading prices versus retail prices. So hopefully that helps explain kind of what we're looking at. So overall, scrappers, happy to answer your questions. Keep them coming. Keep reporting your prices. Keep checking us out online. Ask us questions from, RR Cats to RR Carbide or anything that has to do with scrap metal. We'd love to get you those answers. My name is Tom. Today is Wednesday, July 24th, 2024. And until next week, I'll scrap you later.
Thanks for watching our video. For $2.99 a month, by becoming a member, you can get access to early videos, member-only videos, merchandise discounts from our store, and priority comments that we answer before answering any other scrappers. Click the link below to learn more. Until next time, scrap you later.